All right, I think we are live, so I'm just gonna go ahead. It doesn't seem like I'm going to be able to uh, see comments, which is a problem. I'll see if I can figure that out while I'm on here. Um, However, yeah, let's see. This is something I don't particularly like when I can't see the comments, because that really, obviously puts a damper on interactivity, which is something I like to have on these. So hopefully I can figure that out. But anyway, welcome. This is another what should be one of the last Thursday live streams of this campaign. This is Dennis Misigoy, the Libertarian candidate for the U.S. Senate here in the state of Florida. And we are within 3 weeks of Election Day. So, we're coming down to it. We are getting close there. So today is the 20th. And yeah, that leaves us less than 3 weeks. Early voting, I think, should be starting at the beginning of next week. So for those of you who aren't doing the mail-in ballot thing, don't already have your ballots that way, and haven't already bubbled in the correct bubble, that third one there for U.S. Senate, which is myself, Dennis Misigoy, Libertarian Party of Florida, candidate for U.S. Senate. Make sure that you make plans to, and obviously to let everybody else know that that's what they should do. And I'm trying to think. Gosh, I'm really irked by not having visibility for comments right now. This thing is just not refreshing the screen the way I like for it to do. So I'm gonna see what I can do about it, but it is always tricky. So I'm gonna do what I can. It's not being cooperative here though. So whatever. Let's go ahead. And anyway. So as you guys, those of you guys who are following this race, obviously might know there was a sham of a debate earlier this week on Tuesday evening featuring the two-party establishment candidates, Marco Rubio, our incumbent senator, and Val Demings, the Democrat challenger. I have a reaction video to that I posted here on Facebook, also posted on my YouTube channel, and linked to it in a few other places. So I invite you guys to check that out. I don't want to be too redundant with talking about it, but it is one of these things where it's telling for me sort of the things they talk about and the things they don't talk about. And one of the things that stuck out to me by the time I got to the end of it was, with all the stuff they talk about doing and government doing and trying to solve these problems, and particularly when they're talking about drug prices and this and that, is the fact that one thing that never enters into the conversation is the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution, which defines the powers of Congress, the Senate included, obviously, and, obviously places limits on those powers as well. There's not even a consideration for the fact of whether any of this stuff that they're talking about is constitutionally authorized. Again, that's telling. That's not even a debate about any one of these things, even when they're talking about, say, for example, gun rights. Again, it doesn't really boil down to the Constitution. What rights does it protect, and what rights are enshrined in the supreme law of the land that they all swear an oath to uphold and defend, and that any U.S. senator, anybody elected to that office, is sworn to uphold and defend and protect. And there's not even consideration for the fact that as they sit there, and even Senator Rubio, touting his support for red flag laws. There's not even a consideration about whether or not that violates the Constitution, whether it violates the Second Amendment, whether it violates the guarantee of due process. So, not even a second thought about these sort of things. So, it should be troubling for anyone who values the Constitution and thinks that that's important. Certainly when you hear about some of the other issues that were discussed, were troubling as well. Of course, they're again in a competition to see who's more anti-Putin, who is more antagonistic towards China, but there's no rational person in the room. It's very simplistic thinking. We've got to do what we've got to do for whatever reason to continue to stoke the flames of conflict, and there's again not even a consideration of what's the real bad possibilities for the American people here, and even for the people we're supposedly over there helping. Not over there helping, but helping over there in the Ukrainians, which, obviously we take a little bit different opinion on, we take a little bit different perspective on. I don't think that prolonging the war stretching it out in this way is really of a benefit to those people. And really, as things have gone on, the only thing that's really progressed from there is that a lot of people have died. A lot of the country's been, for lack of a better term, destroyed, infrastructure destroyed, the country itself. And on top of all that, they've lost territory. The Russians have taken territory, and they've even taken the extraordinary step of, putting up these referendums, which are obviously not quite reliable, to say the least, to then try to justify annexation. But now you've got an escalation, and they've lost more territory. And it's probable that had they tried to do some kind of peace deal right at the beginning, that there would have needed to still be a some measure of concession in that sense. Maybe you give up the claims to Crimea or some other things. Again, that's not for necessarily us to decide. That's for Ukraine to decide. But the longer this is stretched out, and we've obviously taken the step of wanting this to stretch out. We have not wanted it to be concluded by a peace deal early on with limited concessions. Now, the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for the Ukrainians, the worse it gets for the folks over there. And so it really is a fake sort of compassion that says that the right thing to do is to just arm people and to, stoke further conflict there, and to allow things to escalate and continue on, and to the detriment of the people we're allegedly helping. But again, this is consistent with the idea that we get from these folks who are also trying to put forward the idea of replicating the 1980s Soviet Union and Afghanistan sort of scenario, which again they're looking at it from some kind of strategic standpoint of just wanting to hurt Russia. This isn't about helping Ukraine, okay? There's a lot of other things that people can try to point to that are negative about the example I just pointed out, but I think the biggest one, if you're talking about compassion for the people there, is that it's estimated that as many as 2 million Afghan civilians died in that conflict. So that's not really an example to emulate, in my humble view. Let me see. Getting back to other business from that debate, another thing, and this was a topic that wasn't really dealt with a ton, but it was dealt with a little bit at the beginning, was talk about inflation. But again, from both Rubio and from Demings, the consistent thing is that neither one of them wants to really acknowledge the problem. They might both talk about, some basic stuff in terms of legislation, in terms of talking about, Rubio talks a little about spending, but he's not exactly a guy who's been big on cutting spending, a big fiscal responsibility guy. Certainly not when it comes to the military-industrial complex as well. But he certainly touted his support and his backing of PPP loans, or his role in the creation of that program. Which again, this is another thing I want to take a chance to nitpick at a little bit. This is a thing I really take issue with. And this is the same thing I heard about, again, in reference to Ukraine. Somebody mentioning about Ukraine buying, military-grade equipment that had been sold off to local police departments and then was being sold over to Ukraine, but Ukraine's doing it using loans. But again, we call it loans, or the government calls it loans. It's presented to the people as though it's loans, PPP loans, with the suggestion that they're not just giving away your tax dollars to fund these operations or to subsidize these companies or to bail them out or whatever you want to call it. So they present it as loans. But so often these loans are just forgiven, like what we've seen in the conversation about PPP, and we've obviously know about when it comes to a lot of other countries that the U.S. has given loans to, or different agencies of that give away money to. They call it a loan, but then the loan gets forgiven, and it's the taxpayer who gets to eat the cost, or anybody who's holding U.S. dollars that are just inflated for it. So they talk a little bit about that. They talk about the Inflation Reduction Act that doesn't reduce inflation. But at the end of the day, the one thing that neither one of them talks about is the actual root cause of all this, which is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars, particularly in 2020, at the height of, or at the onset of the COVID hysteria and outbreaks and everything. COVID in particular, thinking about back in early 2020, March or so, when the CARES Act was passed. The CARES Act being at over $2 trillion, the largest government spending bill, I think, in history. So signed off by a Republican president, not to forget. And to people who justify this in a number of different ways, there's a couple points I want to make about that kind of big spending. First off is the fact that so much of that money didn't actually go to people. If you say, well, look, people were in this bind and they needed relief, okay, look, if the bill was, even just primarily, direct relief to people, 75% of the bill or 60% of the bill even was the direct checks to individual Americans, that'd be one thing. Not a great thing, but it would be one thing if it was that. It's not even that. Most of those bills and most of that bill was corporate welfare. It was bailouts, or just corporate welfare, or money for special projects and all this sort of thing. It was done under the guise of COVID, and we need to do something, so we're going to have to spend all this money to save all these programs and people and this and that and the other thing. But but at the end of the day, their feet certainly weren't held to the fire, and they certainly weren't what's the word I'm looking for? They were not. They weren't held to any kind of standard like that. The money was just given away, but it was rushed through because it was COVID, it's urgent, we've got to do something, and it doesn't matter if what we do is give away tons in corporate welfare, we've got to do something. That was the mentality, and it's a toxic mentality we have in government. But the other thing is then, also the other side of the coin is not just in terms of how the money was spent, and you say, well, we needed to do something because of this urgent situation, because everything was getting shut down and people were panicking and everything was disrupted. Okay, then fine. Then here's the other side of the coin is, how do you pay for it? Okay? I'd be open, had I been in Congress at the time, or in the Senate, and I'm in there, and this is the debate, and well, we've got to do something, so we're going to give this emergency spending, so we can give checks to people to help them get through this tough time. Okay, fine. Where are we going to get the money from, is the question. If this is so important right now, if this situation and this issue is so important right now, where are we going to get the money from? If this is so important, then something else has to be less important. Maybe we abolish the FBI, and the FBI's budget gets dedicated to this, or to some other nobler cause. Certainly, there are government agencies that can be dismantled. Certainly, we could have cut funding for gain-of-function research, or should have never had any funding for it. And I've heard about some crazy things, hearing about some deadlier COVID strain being created in a lab in Boston, which sounds absolutely terrifying. And again, I wonder who's paying for that, and if it's us, who's signing off on that payment? And again, would the American people sign off on paying for this if we knew that? So why do we keep reelecting the people who kind of rubber stamp this stuff and allow our tax dollars to be spent in this way? There's a real problem with that. And obviously the negative consequences, the real terrible potential for something awful to happen there, as has already happened with COVID. Depending upon what you, and again, I don't know that we'll ever get necessarily a smoking gun on this one, but clearly there's reason to be concerned about, what's the word I'm looking for? What happened and where it came from. But the potential that American taxpayers funded unwittingly the development of the virus in a lab that ultimately became COVID and was released due to an accidental leak or whatever the situation was, that possibility, can't really be ignored. And again, even if it's not that one, again, how do American people really feel about doing kind of research that creates deadlier viruses? I mean, who wants to pay for that when we're $31 trillion in debt, and we're going through all these other issues? Who wants to be paying for that in this country? I don't think there's quite a broad consensus of people who support that. So why is it happening? And it's like so many other things. But my point again is, if you're going to spend all this stuff, look, obviously as a libertarian, I'm not a big fan of redistribution of wealth and just writing out checks to people. But I will tell you this. redistribution of wealth is better than big government. It's better than government keeping the money and spending it on government projects and government meddling in people's lives. There are legitimate functions of government. I'm not an anarchist. There are legitimate functions of government, but they are very limited, and it is not at all the kind of stuff that we see going on and the stuff that is really debated here so often with these kind of issues. So, but back to the original point. The CARES Act was $2 trillion. There was, I think, another $4 trillion that the Fed just injected into the system, doling out to other banks to kind of help them, get stuff going through the COVID pandemic back in 2020, and still more since then. And, what's the effect? The effect is inflation. More dollars in the system reduces the value of the dollars that are already in circulation. The dollar itself loses value, and that's what we get. And again, it's important to understand that inflation isn't just about prices going up and down. There are lots of things that can make prices go up and down. Okay, if there's if a hurricane hits us here in South Florida, as happened not too long ago, and it happens to be one of these situations where it really makes it difficult for things like fuel and basic supplies, and we lose electricity in places, well then certain, they call it price gouging, but the price of things goes up. If there's less gasoline in there, well that drives up, the cost of it quite naturally, and that's an appropriate market response because you have increased demand or diminished supply, and this is what happens. So, but that's not inflation. Inflation is the dollar itself, is the currency losing value. And that's what we're seeing because of the irresponsible monetary policy. And again, they talk about inflation and how it's affecting people, and there's not a peep about the Fed. There's not a peep about monetary policy. There's not a peep about the massive increase in the money supply, trillions of dollars being created out of thin air. And if there's not even a thought about the Federal Reserve, how in the world are you going to deal with inflation? It's absurd. And so, again, I offer myself as the candidate who is serious about this as an issue, who is not going to pass the buck on or just nod and allow the system that created all these problems to go on. I'm the guy who, the audit the Fed and the Fed candidate here. And I believe that really the only path for us is we need sound money, and the only real solid path to that is monetary freedom. Get out of this business of having either our government or an adjacent central bank deciding what the money is going to be and printing it out of thin air. This is never what was intended. It's certainly not authorized by the Constitution, and it's something we got to get away from. If for nothing else, to abide by the Constitution, but also to really save this country, because this is a big part of what is just dragging us down at this point, and there's really no escaping it for anybody. Obviously, the rich feel the brunt of it less than the rest of us. The ultra wealthy, the connected, and certainly those in the federal government or who get their money from the federal government bear a little bit less of the brunt. But I am here giving us the alternative because, if you care about inflation and the economy and how this is affecting your life, and again, there really wasn't even that much about economic policy because, again, there's not really that huge difference. Both of these two, Rubio and Demings, are both on the same side of having government, again, redistribute wealth between companies, between businesses, between industries to say that, well, China's subsidizing their industry X, microprocessors or whatever, and so we need to do the same thing. We need to be just like China and communist China and take money away from productive industries through taxation and then redistribute it into these other companies because we want them to be more competitive against the Chinese companies. So the way to make them better is to have government giving them money, which really flies in the face of anyone of any sort of sense of reason of anyone who actually understands free markets and a price coordinated economy and why that works better. Not government meddling, government redistribution of wealth there to do that sort of thing. So certainly there's worse things they can spend the money on, like the foreign policy. But this is again indicative of the big differences or not so big differences between the two parties. But again, going back to it, man, the Federal Reserve, this is an issue that they're just ignoring. The inflation that is just dragging this country down. And economic policy in general, it's one of those things where people talk about it's one of the most important things, and yet these folks ignore the cause. And so, if you want a candidate who's serious about getting at the root of that one, there really is only one option. It is to vote Libertarian, vote Gold, vote for me. My name is Dennis Misigoy. So you'll have the opportunity right there at the top of that ballot. Let's see. What else am I thinking of? We talked a little bit about. I'm trying to think. I think we talked a little bit about Rubio. Reiterating his support for red flag laws. We talked a little bit about foreign policy. We talked about the absence of any discussion about monetary policy, any real. They talk about inflation, but they don't talk about the Fed. Then you're not really talking about inflation. You're not talking about the cause, and you're not talking about dealing with it. Let me see. I'm trying to think back to what other key issues that we had in that debate. And again, I want to reiterate the fact, and I know I've talked about this at length. I've made posts about it. I made a response video to the debate itself. But it really is something I need to reiterate, is the fact that, look, we had a debate back in September 15th. I helped to be one of help organize the thing. I had my team extend invitations to every candidate on the ballot to come out and be a part of the event, and some people responded, and Rubio and Deming's camp didn't, and obviously they didn't show up for it. But we debated. I was on Space Coast Daily TV. You can find that. I have links to that all up and down all my social media. In addition to that, on October 6th, there was a candidate forum hosted by the Upper Keys, folks in the Upper Keys. There's the Island of Key Largo Federation of Homeowners Associations and the Upper Keys League of Women Voters hosted a candidate forum where they even allowed us, who were coming from statewide candidates, to connect remotely to speak to voters. And so there's really no excuse. It doesn't matter where you're campaigning from, whether you're in the Panhandle or in Tampa or wherever. This was accessible, and every candidate who wasn't a Republican or Democrat showed up and spoke to voters and answered questions there. So there really is no excuse. The key with the Republicans and Democrats, with Rubio and Demings, they don't want you guys to know that you have alternatives. They don't want you to know that you have a choice, that you have alternatives that are serious alternatives. They certainly don't want you to know where I stand on issues. So they want to pretend we don't exist. They keep on framing it as the two-person race. There's 5 names on the ballot. Everybody's going to see 5 names on the ballot. And I've been willing to stand up and stand next to and speak with, alongside, and let voters compare me and the other candidates. And I invite people to do that because there's a clear distinction between myself and every other candidate in this race, every other candidate on the ballot. Okay, I am the anti-war candidate, the sound money monetary freedom candidate, the drug war candidate, the Second Amendment candidate, the health freedom candidate, the police reform candidate, and on and on and on. The principled candidate, the life, liberty, property candidate. So there's a clear distinction. The Constitution candidate. It really is that simple. And but they don't want you to see that. They don't want you to know about it. And I gotta, as I'm talking about this, give some credit to the fellow libertarians over in Georgia who have been in the debates and have been doing some good work over there. And making for some interesting stories as the media tries to frame things one way or the other in terms of what's going on over there. But this is obviously, we're at a critical time, and we're really close to the election. Early voting is starting, so please spread the word. Let people know. Send people to this website, misigoy.com. Let them know they have a choice. It doesn't have to be this way. We're in this mess. And again, things aren't going to change quickly. And this is going to be my message. I know that everyone's going to tell you, don't waste your vote, you're splitting the vote, this and that. No, 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 no. Everything I just told you about, you're not splitting a vote, okay? If you're anti-war, this is the only anti-war vote. If you're for sound money, fighting inflation, monetary freedom, this is the only vote for that, okay? This is the only vote for free markets, the only vote for free trade, the only vote for ending the drug war, the only vote for police reform, and on it goes. So you're not splitting any vote. This is the only option if these are the issues that matter to you. If any one of those are the issues that matter to you, personal liberty, if those are the issues that matter to you, there's no alternative vote. You're not getting the same thing if you vote for Demings or Rubio. So you're not splitting that vote. You're having an option, which you didn't have before, and that's why I fought to get on the ballot, and that's why I'm still here running this race and talking to you guys, because I want you guys to know that you do have an alternative, a real difference, and to let people know. Things didn't have to be this way in this country. We didn't have to get to this point of being in all these conflicts and so deep in debt and dealing with all this inflation, but we're here. But the good news is that it doesn't have to stay this way. We can lead the way. It's not going to change, isn't going to come overnight. It is not going to be fast, but you guys have the power. You are the power, to make this change. So let's not wait. Let's not kick the can down the road another 2 years, 4 years, or whatever, and wait for another opportunity. We can lead the way here in Florida. Okay, we don't need to wait. We can set an example for the rest of the country to say we're done with the two-party system. We're sick of it. We need things to change, and we don't just need a change. We need peace and we need liberty, and that's what I'm here to represent, and that's what my candidacy and my policies are all about. So I'm asking you guys again, please support me. If you haven't voted already, because if you're not doing the mail-in voting, early voting coming up next week, and obviously the general election day on November 8th. So in any case, spread the message and make sure that you do vote. Misigoy, Dennis Misigoy, Libertarian, Party of Florida, candidate for U.S. Senate in this election. Thank you guys for joining me. Be looking at trying to do some other interviews. Stay tuned, because I'll try and be doing some more things in the coming weeks to try to finish this up. Looking at also trying to get out to CannaFest in Mount Dora on just before Election Day on November 5th. So stay tuned for that as well. We're going to see. And thank you guys again for joining me. And stay strong and spread the word. Thank you.